During the early 80s, while his lawsuit with Marvel Comics over the rights to Howard the Duck was ongoing, it seemed like Steve Gerber had disappeared from comics. Despite appearances, Gerber hadn't left comic books behind, but his work during this time was sporadic, as he primarily focused on animation and creator-owned work. After leaving Marvel, Gerber's only mainstream option was DC. Allegedly, he did a number of proposals, such as a revamp of Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman with Frank Miller. He also proposed a radical take on Hawkman. This rejected proposal would be reworked and become the controversial series Void Indigo. Possibly due to Gerber's ongoing lawsuit with Marvel and his iconoclastic reputation, DC was a little hesitant about hiring Gerber. However, one proposal that was approved was the 4-issue miniseries The Phantom Zone in 1982. If you're new and you like what you see, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. If you want to go a step further and directly support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. The Phantom Zone is an odd addition to the Gerber bibliography, and a somewhat strange addition to the pre-Crisis Superman mythology. In this story, all the villains confined to the Phantom Zone escape, while at the same time trapping Superman in the Phantom Zone. Then General Zod and his cohorts smash Superman's Phantom Zone projector, thus ensuring there's no possible way for him to be released from his other dimensional prison. Following this, the Kryptonian criminals then fling the JLA satellite into deep space, throw Supergirl into a radioactive disintegration pit, and steal Green Lantern's power battery. Basically, they cause as much mayhem as a group of superpowered, self-absorbed bad people would do given the opportunity. But they do have a plan. These aren't random acts of unkindness. General Zod's ultimate goal is to construct a Phantom Zone cannon large enough to send the Earth into the Phantom Zone. Why? Because he can, and because he knows it will irritate Superman. Of course, Superman escapes the Phantom Zone just in time to prevent this from happening. What is interesting is that Superman is placed in a situation he can't punch his way out of, nor can he outthink his opponent. His only manner of escape is to embark on a spiritual journey. It's one that challenges his confidence and his belief in himself. He has to persevere on the strength of his character, not his powers. On his journey, Superman is joined by the former Kryptonian, Charlie Questel. Charlie was once a villain who lost his powers and his memories after being exposed to gold kryptonite. For years he lived on Earth, completely powerless and believing he's an Earthican while working for the Daily Planet. He's like a loser copy of Clark Kent. For the record, Charlie's past is within continuity. In Superman number 157 from 1962, Charlie was released from the Phantom Zone after serving his sentence. He then caused some mayhem and tried to strip Superman of his powers with gold kryptonite. He sacrificed himself instead when he learned Superman had discovered he had been falsely convicted. Powerless and with no memory, Superman got Charlie a job at the Daily Planet. There are a few other things about Charlie worth mentioning. For one, he has a sleep condition, a recurring theme in Gerber's work. This is something Gerber himself struggled with. It's through these haunted dreams that we learn of the various crimes committed by the various criminals. Additionally, while asleep, the villains coerce Charlie into assembling a device that will allow them to escape the Phantom Zone. Considering Charlie's connection to the Phantom Zone, it makes sense that he'd be susceptible to manipulation by the villains trapped there. It also makes sense that he could, over a number of months, assemble a complex device. In essence, Charlie is a foil for Superman. Charlie is what Superman might be like if he had no direction and lacked a certain level of confidence. These are weaknesses that others exploit for their own devious purposes. Certainly, Superman's powers are part of him, but they don't define him. He has other core characteristics that are equally important, if not more important. Charlie struggles, especially during the spiritual journey, because he lacks these vital character traits, not because he lost his powers. Also, Charlie is a reader surrogate. Put in the same situation, with someone possessing incredible power, a noticeable resilience to opposition, and a singular focus to help others, an average person would likely follow their guidance and be inspired. Through this process, Charlie, or the reader, learn about themselves and embrace the strength they didn't know they possessed. So even though Charlie begins in a bad place, through his journey with Superman, Charlie learns more about himself and manages to become more than he ever expected to be. He figuratively becomes a Superman. As for the bad guys, General Zod and his cohorts are the basic characters one would expect. However, Gerber does take the time to highlight a few obscure characters and examine their beliefs and motivations. In fact, the majority of the first issue is dedicated to introducing and elaborating on the crimes these prisoners have committed. Overall, they are a bit undeveloped, but at the very least, there is a foundation for their bad behavior. Realistically, there was only so much Gerber could do with only 4 issues, and about a dozen characters to juggle. This miniseries contains one of the most surreal sequences in a Superman comic. He finds himself in a room surrounded by scantily clad, masked women. And when he removes the masks they wear, their heads are the planet Krypton. One by one, these heads explode, plastering Superman with shards of radioactive kryptonite. He stumbles backwards into a pool of goo and sinks to his next challenge. Superman's escape is equally bizarre. The presence that rules the Phantom Zone melts him down, ingests him, and then, expels him out of a metropolis sewer. I think that may be the one and only time Superman has returned to Earth by being pooped out by a godlike entity. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of doesn't make sense, but it's too unusual not to appreciate on some level. The artwork is done by frequent Gerber collaborator Gene Colan, and he does something subtle but cool with the panels in the first issue. Any sequence that takes place on Earth is done in the standard square grid. Sequences that take place in the Phantom Zone are done in his usual, irregular Colan style. He does try to stick to this format later in the series, but not with as much consistency. Still, it was an interesting choice, and it worked very well. The only real criticism is the ending is a bit brisk. After 3.5 issues of build-up, with villains running wild, Superman and the other featured heroes end their reign of terror with barely any effort. Then again, Zod and the other prisoners aren't really the protagonists of this little adventure. They're simply Superman's motivation to escape. Still, it does happen quickly and feels a little anticlimactic. Gerber was well known to be quite satirical in his work, most notably in Howard the Duck. In this miniseries, there's only one obvious instance of satire. In the final issue, there's a scene involving a musical and cultural movement known as Bizarro. This is probably a little jab at punk rock, which was still alive, but on its last legs. After all, the singer does give off a Wendy O. Williams vibe, and she is called Wendy Why Bother. So, for a brief period in Metropolis's history, it had a thriving punk movement. Anyway, Gerber describes the Bizarro movement as stating that anyone born after 1961 is an imperfect human duplicate. This is a twist on a catchphrase from the hippie movement, "Don't trust anyone over 30. Sure, it's not deep or meaningful, and it's very quick, but Gerber did manage to insert a little social critique. After all, both punk rock and the hippie movement were acts of rebellion, utilizing some hyperbolic rhetoric. Philosophically, they were wildly different, but they had a similar core. They were angry young people trying to fight the system. In the end, The Phantom Zone is not a bad read. It's definitely an unusual Superman story that subverts one's expectations of what a Superman story can be. That, in and of itself, makes it worthwhile. As a final note, Gerber did write a one-shot Phantom Zone prelude in DC Comics Presents a few years later. It basically fills in some areas of the original story and establishes the entity Superman would face in the Phantom Zone miniseries. It's not essential reading, but it needs to be mentioned because it directly ties into this miniseries. Also, historically, it's the final time Krypton is represented in its original form, before being rewritten and revisualized when Superman was rebooted following Crisis. All that's left to say is thank you for watching, or listening, whatever the case may be. Additional thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. I'm still struggling to hit my goal of being able to do this full time, and possibly to do longer or more videos per week. So if you can help, please do. Extra special thanks to Big Ounce, Phil Sagan, Corey Drew, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, Johnny Lim, Steve White, Taylor Dull, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Hey look, a playlist. Check it out for a variety of fine video products. Until next time.